This is the painting I selected. This is the Soutine, the painting the museum owns and has since the 40s, I think. So this is a painting that can really stand lots of looking. I've been here before and looked at it for like an hour, sitting here. This again is Chaim Soutine, who was a Russian Jew who lived on the edge of the kind of Russian Empire in a rural ghetto, had a very brutal upbringing. And when he was a child, he was obsessed with drawing. And so he even stole to get materials to draw with. He did a drawing of the village idiot. He asked the rabbi to sit with him to draw the rabbi. And of course, this was against strictures of graven image. So he was beaten quite severely when he was about 16. And it reads like a fable. The rabbi then gives the family money because the son has beaten this young Soutine so badly. And with this money, he's able to leave and go to Lithuania to art school. And so from there, there's a doctor who sort of takes interest in him and pays for him to go to Paris. So he ends up in Paris in the teens, I guess. Befriends Modigliani, who was a very sophisticated Italian painter. Both of them were alcoholics, they drank obsessively. This guy did, in fact, have terrible stomach ulcers. He used motifs, many types of motifs. This is from a series he did, they're uniform figures. And they're often people like pastry chefs, valets, bellhops, even like some altar boys, people that I think maybe people that would pose for him, really. And also he painted as well like lots of food items like rabbits, dead rabbits, flayed beef, lots and lots of chickens, fish. So again, I think this element of food, whether it has to do with his stomach and this idea, which I love, that he's trying to consume by painting something. I just love that. You can kind of almost see it in like the urgency of how this thing is painted. Or it could be that he's relating to, strictures about dietary restrictions for religious reasons or whatever. He painted everything from life. So he's confronting this guy as probably the distance out here, I would say, while this pastry chef is standing here. And what I find interesting about this is kind of the pose anyone sort of assumes when they're sort of addressing people or addressing a viewer. A lot of ways. The old contrapposto, it's very classic. You've got weight on one leg, this leg thrust forward. People stand like this, shift their weight. So this figure is doing that. It's in a very almost classical position, which is odd for a painter this ferocious, to really have that kind of classical nature to this pose. The other thing about it is he painted this probably in one shot, one day. Apparently he painted one day, and if he didn't like the painting, next day he'd paint another painting on top of it. So that's just amazing, that he could paint this painting in one shot like that. I think he's using pretty much, maybe a half-inch brush. And the other thing I'd read is that he would just have lots of brushes and he would use them and then just drop them on the floor and grab another brush. So he could keep kind of the color fairly clean, though it's wet into wet. So you're getting optical mixing of things. And you almost kind of bleed, the intensity starts to bleed out of the painting, which is interesting. He wants you to be right up on top of it, which a lot of art, you need lots of distance to sort of see it, even compositionally. But at this painting, you can be right on top of it. You can get really close to it, which is really interesting. The other thing I think, because he's working from life, I always think, this guy has a very bemused look on his face, like he's standing there in front of this maniac, is what I always think when I look at it. This painter is just painting ferociously because he's trying to knock this thing out in a single viewing. I've always been just amazed how little white is in that white jacket, but it's just totally, it's a white jacket. The other thing is he's kind of a realist, but he's not, he's arbitrary and subjective, highly subjective, but he is dealing with what he's seeing. So there's that. He's kind of narrowing this gap between like a thought and its expression. So he's getting it so he's so close, the two things are so tight that he's just like working in that totally, intuitive way. So what I think is happening is there's obviously the face is the center of interest, that jacket, all these marks sort of plunge down to these hands, which always fascinate me because you read them exactly what they're like, but they're eternally kneading. The hands never stop kneading. The other big thing about this, of course, is that incredible red. Now, I don't, looking at this, I've looked at this for a long time, I can't really tell if it's a backdrop that he had behind the figure, and then this is maybe the fold of it, and this kind of pinkish area is maybe the fold of it, but he definitely pops you back into space right there and puts this foot in this plane. But this feels like a real person to me, like it has a presence like a person would, though it's highly distorted. It's very short, for one thing, and this head's enormous on this body. So, that's a very odd distortion that's happening. And again, like this expression, I look at that, it's just barely there, it's shifting again. And my thing is, I always feel like he's sort of looking, maybe he has a hard time looking at this guy trying to paint him. So I was feeling like he's sort of looking off this way. And he's a little amused by him, I think, by this confrontation with this painter who's staring so hard at him. It's aggressively flat, but it's also dealing with space, which is kind of the modernist, battle. It was always that. How to assert the fact that you're on a flat surface, and then, whether you're pushing back into space, which is more of a classical kind of way of depicting. That's the really interesting thing. There's a kind of a classical feeling to them. At the same time, they're wild.